Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Union Federation podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network and the BQN Network. Of course, last week we returned as we are covering all things Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Quite possibly the most popular Star Trek show going right now. But we got another great episode to talk about, as well as some other Star Trek news. But I cannot do that with a full crew to talk about the greatness that is Strange New Worlds. And of course, it starts with our returning security officer. He's been out on special assignment, seeing countries down under, all kinds of things, looking into koalas, wombats, all kinds of crazy creatures. The one and only Mr. Kevin Reitzel.
What's up? Well, good to be back, by the way. Yeah, I've been in Australia for the last few weeks, hanging out with my wife's family and friends, but it's good to be back.
Yeah, you did observe the Prime Directive while you were in Australia?
No, I did not.
I kind of figured as much. But two, you know what? It is not Union Federation without our ship's top-notch holo captain. She's also our counselor and so much more. The wonderful Amy Nelson.
I regret you had to witness that outburst. So sorry. That was just too much. I'm so
very
sorry.
Unbecoming of you, counselor.
Yes.
Yeah, I am. So we're going to have to get you in some sessions. I can see this now.
Yes.
So. Haley Stoddard, our wonderful science officer, is down in sick bay, not feeling real well this week. But don't worry, because returning to the Union Federation podcast to bring more greatness to Strange New Worlds in our discussions, BQN Zone, Mark White.
Hola.
Hey, Mark.
Welcome.
Hey, everybody.
We are glad to have you back. We must have kept you out of the P corner from the ship last week, so that's the only reason why I figured you would not return. So we're just going to keep that corner cordoned off.
The P corner. Oh no.
Yeah. A great Orville thing, but
reference, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
So. But guys, we have an absolutely phenomenal episode of Strange New Worlds to talk about. But first, we've got a little bit of Star Trek news. Okay, guys, I'm sitting on my social media on Friday, just flipping through things, and I get blown away as I come from reading in a couple of announcements just as they hit a major news story with Star Trek Prodigy, the animated series, the wonderful animated series that was created to air on Nickelodeon and Paramount Plus, has been canceled. After this series has already been renewed for a second season. This has got a lot of people upset and a lot of people talking within the Star Trek realms. I know our good friend Norman Lau was very upset by this because he is an absolute huge fan of the show. This came out of nowhere, Amy.
It did. And I do not understand, because when I look at Paramount, there are many shows that have lots of different spin-offs. NCIS had 3 or 4. There's this new series, FBI. They have 3 series on live network, like CBS. There's those Law and Orders. How many Law and Orders are there? So Star Trek is the same there. Like we have, right? Strange New Worlds, Discovery, Prodigy, Lower Decks. Like that's only 4 shows. We're doing fine. There has been precedent before. So I don't understand why they are canceling something like Prodigy.
We're going to get into that in a minute, but I want to get, Mark, your reaction to this Prodigy news when it came out.
I was thinking about that one episode from season 2, I believe, where the crew, the Prodigy, they went down to that planet and they had the aliens that were getting infected by that crash shuttle from the TOS Enterprise, and they ended up assisting them. And to me, it doesn't get more Star Trek-y than that. It was just, I mean, that was just glorious. And I can only imagine where they plan to go. Actually, that would have been the second half of season 1, technically, but where they were going to go with season 2. This is just a tragedy, and all the writers and the creators were just so supportive of all the other Trek shows, like telling people to watch and tuning in with us and tweeting about the new episodes of like Picard and whatnot. And so it's really a sense of community, and these are community members that were providing like just a great Star Trek for us. And I feel for all of them and us, because it's a loss for everybody.
Kevin, I actually wanted to come to you last on this because I think there's a tie into things we have been talking about on our other show, Culture Clash, when it comes to streaming and what's been going on with this in streaming environments lately. And I'm wondering if Star Trek Prodigy isn't a victim of that. But what were your first thoughts when you heard that the show was canceled, other than the fact you still haven't got your stuff Murph yet?
Yeah, it's true. They have toys out for this already, and they canceled the show, which is weird. Okay, so I was trying to think back. The partnership that they had with what was it, Nickelodeon, or what was the other station?
Well, it was Nickelodeon, and you have to remember Paramount owns Nickelodeon,
right. And they were. Part of me was not surprised. I'll be honest with you. I enjoy the show a lot. Visually, it's fantastic. But I started immediately thinking, why is this show underperforming? Why is it not connecting with new fans, maybe, or maybe even other fans that aren't us of Star Trek? And I started thinking about all the little things. I'm like, is it the lack of humans on the actual bridge of this ship? Is it because they're mostly aliens? Is it too forward thinking for newer fans to grasp onto? Is it the timeline? What is it about this thing that I was trying to pick it apart, and I hated doing that because I like the show, and I like that it was kind of a risk, which, maybe we find out why maybe it's a little too much of a risk. But I was curious to see where these characters were going, because we kind of felt like they went full circle on one stage, and now we were going to get the next stage into Starfleet and such. So I don't know. Maybe Jenkum Pog needs to stop talking the third person. I don't know. I think he was the weak link of the crew, to be perfectly honest with you. He was funny at times, but I wanted to see. We saw
Jenkum disagrees.
we saw development from a lot of characters, but I don't know if we saw much from him. But I'm not going to put the cancellation of the show on Jenkum. But I'm trying to kind of, that glass half empty part of me is trying to figure out what was it that didn't click. Because obviously, maybe Nickelodeon, it wasn't getting the views there, thus not connecting to the younger audience it was intended for. But us as Star Trek fans, we can usually, as much as we can be hard on Star Trek, most of us Star Trek hardcore fans will always try to find the best out of a show, even bad episodes of shows that we like. We always still try to find the best, even though we know maybe it's not so good. So I don't know. I'm not surprised, though, to be honest with you.
So from TrekMovie.com, I found some news, and this is the first site and only site I've really seen that's added a piece of this then, that when I saw what has happened at Paramount Plus, because Prodigy wasn't the only show they canceled. The Paramount Global back streamer has canceled also the very well talked about Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies, after a single season.
My wife turned it off after 2 episodes, by the way. So if that tells you something, she's a huge Grease and Grease 2 fan. So
it obviously reversed the decision on the season 2 pickup for Star Trek Prodigy, axed competitive series Queen of the Universe after 2 seasons, and nixed the game revival after 2 seasons. Additionally, all 4 shows are being removed from Paramount Plus as the conglomerate joins Disney and Warner Brothers Discovery in canceling underperforming series. So here's the business side of this, because it started with Warner Brothers, with David Zaslav canceling a bunch of things on the HBO Max streaming platform, or Max as it's now called. Disney just recently did this with several shows that they had that were considered failures. Kevin, probably the most well-known of that was the Willow series. They removed it from the streamer. By removing these shows from their streamers and basically putting them in the vault, these companies get a huge tax break from this. However, here's the downside to this. If these companies do this and put them in the vault for a tax break, once they claim that tax break, they can never publish these shows again. They can't put them out under their name or property ever again, or they will be paying IRS fees out the yin-yang.
So what you're saying is those physical media copies might become a little more important now.
And in this sense, yes. I know that they have said that they have been given permission to shop Star Trek Prodigy. I don't foresee anybody picking it up because I don't necessarily know if you can get all the elements. Because, for instance, I don't know what Kate Mulgrew's contract is with Star Trek as far as her likeness and her voice. And I don't know if they could even use her in a second season of Prodigy if somebody else picks it up. I think this show was expensive to make. The animation was beautiful, but that's not cheap. And there was some prime voice talent on this show. John Noble, Kate Mulgrew, a few others, not cheap. And I think we're getting to the point where you're seeing something, even if it has marginally good numbers, these streamers are trying to save money. And also, there's one other thing we got to kick into this is the writer strike. The writer strike is affecting a lot of things. And I think there's some of these shows, because of the writer strike, they're not going to end up seeing the light of day. Kevin, you have an extra thought on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the writer strike, because a lot of companies are looking at, like, we can't wait around on this to be done. This is costing us money to keep these IPs around. So, we're going to be cutting the slack on some of this stuff. But I speculated on my opinion of why this show was probably canceled. I'd like to hear your guys' opinions if you care to share.
Amy, what about you? You have a thought of why this show was canceled?
No, I have no idea. I really don't. Like I said before, there's definitely precedent to have one umbrella show have many breakoffs. So I can't understand that. Maybe if, like you were saying, if on Nickelodeon, it wasn't getting the numbers on that platform. But again, I don't watch Nickelodeon. I don't even know how to watch it. Like, I watch Prodigy on Paramount Plus. That's where supposedly all of Star Trek is supposed to be. And why would they shoot themselves in the foot and say, well, you're not going to be able to watch Prodigy unless you go somewhere else? It just doesn't make any sense. So I have no idea what they are doing over there.
Mark, what about you? Do you have any thoughts of what might have led to the cancellation of Prodigy?
I mean, strategically, it was created to attract the younger viewers to the franchise, right? And I know a lot of people that don't have kids tuned in to watch it, but I'm not sure that a lot of kids were gravitating towards it. And then they spent a whole bunch of money licensing for the action figures and whatnot, which, again, probably the kids didn't buy, but, like, us adults, we picked up a action figure here or there. But I think they were expecting it to be more like Star Wars Rebels or something, which it just was not. It didn't get that kind of audience.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, Mark. I actually really think Prodigy was great because it was a different form of Trek, and I really thought they were exploring some really interesting concepts with it. But this is the way of business right now. I think we're going to be seeing this much more over the next few months with shows as all these elements are coming together, and I think we're really in this seeing a lot of things shifting around in Hollywood, especially if the writer's strike continues and with the way finances are these days. It is a very strange time, and it's going to be worth watching to see what happens. But with that, guys, let's move on because we do have a wonderful episode of Strange New Worlds to get into. So let's head into that. And guys, before we get any farther into this episode, spoilers ahead. We are going to be spoiling the heck out of the latest episode of Star Trek Strange New World. If you have not watched the episode or the Ready Room yet, as of yet, go watch it, come back, join us on YouTube, and see what's going on, see what our thoughts are on this episode. But without further ado, let's get into Strange New Worlds, episode 2, Ad Astra per Aspera. Miss Nelson, would you be so kind to give us the captain's log for Strange New Worlds, episode 2 of season 2?
Yes. As number one's trial for fraudulently joining Starfleet as a genetically modified Illyrian approaches, Pike recruits an Illyrian civil rights attorney, Nira Catul, as her defense counsel. On Catul's advice, number one rejects the plea bargain offered by Starfleet, facing decades of imprisonment if convicted. The prosecution easily builds a case that number one violated the law. Catul argues that the law is unjust and inconsistently applied. In her cross-examination of Admiral April, she demonstrates that April has violated the Prime Directive with impunity when it was the right thing to do. Meanwhile, La'an attempts to discover how Starfleet learned that number one is genetically modified, worried that the information was taken from her own personal logs. When number one testifies on her own behalf, she discusses the oppression and marginalization genetically modified Illyrians faced in her childhood, how she joined Starfleet because she believed it celebrated diversity, and how she revealed her own genetic status to Starfleet. Catul argues that number one can be construed to have been seeking asylum from oppression when she joined Starfleet, which Pike had the authority to provisionally grant. The judges accept this interpretation and return an acquittal.
Thank you so much, Amy. Guys, this was a amazing episode of Star Trek for me. I love this episode. We get a little bit something different, courtroom action with Trek. But I'm curious to know what everybody's first reactions were. Mark, I want to start with you. What were your first reactions to this episode?
I text Amy, I think, right after I watched it, and I believe that my response was best courtroom Star Trek episode since Measure of a Man, or at least as good as that. And it was nice to see, because we did see a courtroom episode of Star Trek Discovery, I guess, when it was it the part 3 of that TNG two-parter with Spock?
Yeah, I know which one you're talking.
Unification?
Unification, part 3. I believe that had a courtroom aspect to it.
Yes.
And I remember being so colossally let down by how badly written it was. And I'm like, what happened? They can't write courtroom anymore. And, they're not necessarily like my favorite fun Star Trek episodes to watch, but I love being inspired by them. And when I watched this and I saw how they knocked it out of the park with the acting, how they knocked it out of the park with the writing, how gosh darn episodic it is that I could just pop it on and pop it off whenever. I love it. I love it for so many reasons. It was a great episode.
Mr. Reitzel, what about you? You were getting back here on the Union Federation. I want to ask you too. Give us real quick too, your first thoughts on episode 1 before you dive into episode 2.
I was underwhelmed by episode 1, and now I know why Captain Pike wasn't there for personal reasons and having a baby and all. But I just didn't bring you in. You got to really kind of, if you're going to start a season, you really got to let Pike and the crew kind of do something before you take him out. And I know why they did it, but the Doctor and Chapel thing was interesting, but I didn't really care for it. I'll be honest with you. I didn't rewatch it either. This, however, I did enjoy, and I did rewatch it. And I really like Star Trek when it has really good court/hearing ones. And I'm not a huge fan, you guys know, of Star Trek Discovery, but there was that one episode where there was forgetting her name already, but her mom was there, and they had the whole hearing about her, and her mom was there, and I thought that was like a really well written and acted episode. And I started thinking about all the other Star Trek courtroom dramas, which we'll get into later and stuff. But I was enthralled with the cast here and the writing and just how it reflects a lot of things here and now.
Yeah, I think all very good points, Kevin. Amy, what about you? What were your feelings initially after this episode?
I'm a big fan of courtroom, all things. Like, I just really enjoy it. And this absolutely was wonderful. I was very impressed with the writing, with the language that they were using to identify injustices. There were so many touchstones to different civil injustices that I was like, oh my gosh, this is an all-encompassing episode. Like, you can say Measure of Man is defining what is sentient life. This one, it's covering everything, and I absolutely loved it. So all-encompassing. Yes, this is Star Trek. These are the ideals. We're not perfect. We had a history of what was lawful, and things have to change. And this is another example of when it changes. And so the progression that we go through in this episode with the laws, I loved it. I loved it.
I agree with all of you guys' points. This was a phenomenal episode. I think they really handled the courtroom aspect of it beautifully and in an intelligent manner too. Sometimes when you have, especially a science fiction show that gets into the courtroom side of things or into a legal side of things, sometimes they have a tendency to go a little campy with it or a little overdone with it. And here, I think they just had the perfect tone throughout the episode with this. With that, guys, I do want to talk about the cast in this week's episode. I am going to ask that you guys hold off on talking about Una, Pike, and Nira, because we're going to dive into them more in our away missions. But some of the other cast had some interesting moments in this episode. So who stood out for you guys this week in the cast? Amy.
Okay. That scene with Ortegas and Mbenga, we just got to put that out there. There was the light humor, and who hasn't sat and watched people across the room and made up conversations? I'm like, did they just have a secret camera while I was sitting at the cafe the other day? Like, I absolutely loved it. And then getting that call back to Mbenga, who's been working with Spock, is like, he knows how to read Spock. It's like, no, Spock is furious. He hates him. Can't you see that? I really thought that was a standout, and it brought some levity to a very serious episode. So I'm calling them out.
Kevin, what about you? Who stood out for you in the cast this week?
A couple of the other supporting cast members. I liked Christina Chong's Lon. I thought she stood out, especially when she was there on behalf of Una, and her also having the name Noonien Singh as well. She's been having some good moments on screen. And I also like Melanie Scrofano, who played Captain Patel. I like her as someone, who was on the opposing council and obviously knows Pike, and there's, a relationship there. And I just something about it. I think she's really good. I thought she stood out.
Mark, what about you? Who in the cast stood out for you this week?
The actress that they got to be the
Nira?
The attorney.
The attorney. Yeah.
She was phenomenal.
She was on fire.
Yeah, she was.
They got a good actress to come in and be the attorney. Like, she was believable as an attorney, and she was a badass. And I props also to the costume department, because she looked like a badass. Everybody, like, they were dressed quite nicely. And oh my god, they brought back the TOS, like the special uniforms. I love those with the gold trim. it was
Don't worry. We're gonna get
so
into
much
more.
better.
I promise you, we're gonna get into those in a little bit. For
I
me,
love
guys,
them.
I actually gotta throw out Adrian Holmes as Admiral Robert April. I liked him in the first episode, and I thought the whole scene with him going through the questions and how he handled that, I thought it was a great performance by him. I gotta throw out another great, fun episode from Ethan Peck as Spock. He didn't have a lot, but those little moments, him coming over with the whole I apologize for my outburst," or when he talks about Una keeping a secret and he talks about her being a fan of Gershwin musicals, and just how he played that up just a little bit. I really love his interpretation of Spock so far, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. But
They brought in the short treks for that, so that was some deep cut writing there.
Yeah, well, that's one thing the Writers' Room for Strange New Worlds has done some great deep cut things. But guys, we got a lot to talk about with this episode and a lot of very powerful and interesting things to talk about. So let's get into our first away mission. Okay, topic one for our first away mission here. I want to get right into the two women who were the heart of this episode, and Una and Nira. Lost friends yet found again. Specifically, I want to talk about Nira, who is played by Yetide Badakai, I believe is how it's pronounced.
Is it Yetedi Badaki?
Badaki.
Yeah.
That's
I don't know.
Yetedi.
Yeah, Yetedi Badaki. Guys, I'm gonna put this out right now. This is maybe one of my all-time favorite guest actor performances in a Star Trek episode. She, like Mark said, she was on fire in this episode, but the weight she carried with her and the no-nonsense approach and just how strong of a character this was absolutely phenomenal. And I mean, the performance was just, I'd say it's Emmy-worthy in my book, as far as like guest star on a show. It was absolutely phenomenal, and the depth of character she gave this character in just one episode was outstanding. Amy, I see you nodding your head over there. What were your thoughts on Nira in this episode?
And one thing that I noticed on this third rewatch that I did, how amazing she looks, and that's because of the director. All the camera angles, like when she was carrying the book or when she was leaning on that glass table, that was like amazing. And they lit her well, like everything that they did around her and Una was grand, and it landed to the story. I'm just shouting out the director, another female director, I believe, of that. So I was really impressed. And I got to thinking, and I wanted to ask you, what do you think her genetically augment is? Because she was saying, like when they got separated, like Una and her family went to the normal side, and her family, Nira's family, stayed on the Illyrian side during that segregation. And Una said, well, some of us could pass as being, quote unquote, air quotes, normal. But her family didn't. And I thought that's very interesting. I wonder what her augmentation is. Like every single time I hear about, the Illyrians, they can do this, well, their skin glows, or their healing stuff. Like, I want to know more about what's the possibilities are of this genetically augmented people. And that got me thinking about what hers is.
That's a good point, and I'm wondering if it's not something intellectual, kind of like Una in this case. And just so you know, this episode was directed by Valerie Weiss and written by Dana Horgan. So, yes, it was a female director on this. Mark, you said it yourself just a little bit ago. She was on fire in this episode. I mean, this character was outstanding. Give me a little bit more of your in-depth thoughts for Nira on this episode.
One of the things I enjoyed about it is you see a lot. Well, I don't know. I get bored with a lot of TV because it tends to be predictable. It's like copy and paste. It doesn't matter the show. It's like, this is the formula they're going to go with. And you can kind of see where it's going. But with this particular episode, there were a lot of twists and turns with it. And, you didn't know where it was going, right? And she was kind of almost the narrator for this episode because she had so much dialogue, and she really drove a lot of the scenes with her, acting off different characters from Strange New Worlds, whether it was with Una or Laan. She just, I feel like she was driving the car for all for all of the scenes that she was with, the main cast members, and that's difficult to do. As I think Kevin had mentioned, it's like she came on as a guest star, and she has this commanding presence, and wow, like it was great to see, and she kept me on my toes, and I didn't know where she was going, and her line of questioning, I was like, why is she asking that? What is going on? And then it all comes clear at the end when they paint the picture for you. She was doing it the whole episode, right? But you didn't see the whole picture till the end, so that was really cool. Loved it.
And I will, if you're watching on YouTube, the slide I have up of her, she's got the greatest power outfit wardrobe in Star Trek history. I'm just gonna throw that out right now. But Kevin, what were your thoughts on this guest character in this episode?
Yeah, Yetedi, her wardrobe and her hair was on point. She was looking good and carrying the show, if you think about it. And I hope that we see her back. I would like to see more about these people that have these augments, and what it is specifically that her family chose for her, because I guess it happens when they're kids to a certain point, and maybe additional stuff happens later. It's interesting how they would choose, and maybe there's like a certain amount of stuff that happens to all the children at a certain age to I don't know, make certain things better with their decision making or thinking or whatever it is. I don't know, but she obviously has the power of observation, and also I think she reads people really, really well, especially with body language. And I think that's a skill that I myself can note from people, as well as body language, and how someone might really be feeling depending on how they carry themselves, opposite of what they're actually saying. And I think that puts someone in her position with an advantage. And I think that Yetedi did a really good job with that. And again, shout out to the wardrobe.
Yeah, without a doubt. But guys, I also want to talk about the other side of the coin of the two characters who were the centralness, and that is Una, played by, of course, the amazing Rebecca Romaine. I'm going to say this is probably my favorite episode we've had so far with Una in it, because I really think we got to get a lot of insight to the character that we haven't really gotten a chance even in season 1. We get to see her be vulnerable. We get to see her going through a lot of emotions. And I think this episode really was the first episode that really helped me feel more for this character than just the number one, always being on point. And I think that it was a great turn for this character. Mark, what were your impressions of Una in this episode?
You're absolutely right. She was kind of underrepresented in season 1. I've heard so many people mention that as we've discussed episodes of Strange New Worlds, like on All Good Things and whatnot. But yeah, it keeps coming up that she was so underutilized because she's a fantastic actress and she has a commanding presence. But for the first officer, we didn't see a lot of her season 1. So this was kind of like her episode to shine. And I think we're going to probably see more of her in season 2, at least that's my prediction. I think she's fantastic in the role. It's nice to see the character more fleshed out. And yeah, again, they just couldn't have got a better actress.
Mr. Reitzel, what about you? This was this is probably, I think, Rebecca Romaine's best performance on Strange New Worlds. What are your feelings about what they did with Una and what they had done with the Una character up to this point?
Yeah, she was kind of underutilized in the first season. She was kind of a mystery, but we knew that there was something there between Pike and Una, and camaraderie and the respect between each other. And most of that came through the performance of Pike, especially in the first episode of this season. And I almost kind of forgot that she was, because I didn't go back and rewatch the last season. I forgot that she was in a little bit of a bind there, and I didn't realize where she was. And like, oh, okay, so she's in trouble, and then Pike's gonna try to find a way to help her, and then Pike's not in the rest of the episode, which I thought was an interesting way to do things to help kind of set it up for this one, because we're used to the episodic formula for Strange New Worlds, which we like. We like to return to that. But yet there's still a carryover here, which is interesting. So this had to kind of come to a conclusion in this episode. And Rebecca Romijn, I've always liked her, and we'll get into more a little bit later on the Ready Room. But she was good in this. And I'm curious, though, because she's very, I don't want to say uptight, but by the book. And I want to see an episode or two where Pike's inviting people to his quarters for barbecue or whatever. And I just want to see her loosen up a little bit. That's my only thing I want to see.
I think she had to be, though. I mean, she was concealing the secret. She didn't want to be found out. She didn't want anybody to look into her. So she had to be the best of the best of the best. Maybe now she'll get a chance to loosen up a little.
Yeah,
but I
not
also
hiding
think
anything anymore. So yeah.
Yeah. I also think, though, it could be part of her personality. Going back to that episode of Short Treks, where she is in the turbo lift with Spock, and she does start singing, but then she's like, "You can't tell anybody ever." It's just, it's her whole mystique, so to speak.
I see what you did there.
I was just gonna say, I saw that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Amy, what about you? How did you feel about what they did with Una in this episode, and the Una we got to see in this episode, which is a side of Una we've not seen?
I really liked seeing her by the book. I'm Starfleet all in, and her reason of joining. Like Nira kept asking her, "Why did you join Starfleet?" And to hear her say, "I saw the diversity and felt like I could also, bring diversity to this group and have a place to belong." Very, very powerful. My only nitpick of this whole episode was when Nira was talking to La'an, and Nira said, "Well, Una doesn't speak highly of that many people." And I'm like, whatever. Una is full of praise. She gives it out freely, because people have earned it. And so that one comment I didn't feel fit Una's character. And I just brushed it off like, well, Nira hasn't been around for 25 years, so she don't know nothing. But that one comment, because I'm like, no, Una is very gracious in her praise. So, but other than that, I love learning her backstory so much.
And since you brought that up, Amy, I'm going to flip one other question I have about these two. Is one of the things I found so amazing about this episode was how their friendship gets rebuilt through this episode, and the understanding they find in each other. And yet it's happening in the courtroom as she's testifying. It's not something that happens, it's outside of the courtroom and they have this discussion. Nira sees it in Una's testimony. And I think in the aspect of it, through these testimonies, they both got an understanding of each other that they didn't have before, in places where even as close as they were, they learned something about each other. And I think how they rebuilt their friendship, at least started that rebuild, was something that was well executed in this episode, Amy.
Yeah, their friendship at the end, where she's getting on the transporter and they're just still holding hands, and it's like, oh, I'm glad to have my friend back. That was very rewarding.
Kevin, what about you? What did you think of that aspect of the storyline?
I think it was time for her character to really not literally come forward like she did in the episode and get this burden off her shoulders, but I think it was a time for us to learn something about her. And I think the reasons why she did it are very, very important, in that the fact that they're challenging these laws and guidelines that have been put on Starfleet is huge. And this whole thing regarding eugenics and eugenics wars, it's a touchy subject, just like AI is now.
What about you, Mark? What did you think as far as how they kind of brought Una and Nira back together in this episode with their friendship?
I was surprised that we didn't see Una and Nira as kids, because they had the flashback when she broke her leg, and I think that would have been a good opportunity to show them as friends. Them just saying that they were friends seemed like a throwaway, because 25 years is a long time. Like, I've been out of high school now over 20, and is I don't know if I would consider anybody that I was friends with then my friend now. Not really, because I don't see really or have anything to do with any of those people. And especially if you haven't had any contact in 25 years, friend is a little bit of a stretch, and how would Pike know to go to her? How would he even know that she was a lawyer? Like, it just seems like that whole part of the plot to me seemed like a lot of a reach. Like, why did it have to be her friend? Why couldn't it have just been a lawyer she'd heard about that's also an Illyrian? I don't know. The friend was a little stretch.
I think in this case it works, Mark, because they went through something pretty traumatic together, and they got separated because of family decisions. And I think it was knowing the character of Una, I could see where Una would at least be following up on this person. It wasn't necessarily Una's choice at the time to make that decision of where her family went. So, and I think that it just took a lot of years for hard feelings. And, with the whole Illyrian thing and Una trying to keep her secret, she probably couldn't reach out. So, Amy, you have a thought on this?
Yeah. One other thing I was thinking of, like, these, because they are friends, we can see two different paths taken from a similar experience as as children, where Una wanted to join Starfleet, and now we have Nira, who is one of the best civil defense lawyers, and we can see those two paths from that similar experience. So I sort of wrap it up like that's woven in the story.
That makes sense. But guys, I want to move on to the next topic, and I'm going to say this is one of my favorite lines in the show. Just because it's law doesn't mean it's just. Now, I bear with me here, because I absolutely love what they did in this episode, because yes, they reflected on a lot of things that are happening in our own world today, with groups being persecuted, things of that nature. But there was a flip side to this, and it's something I'm going to honestly say, something I truly believe in that we've kind of lost in our own society, is they also talk about how you have to look at things on an individual basis as well. We can't just, when they make their final decision, they talk about everything with the eugenics war. We can't just, it's not something we can quickly just turn around, and it's much more complicated than that. And in this case, we have to look at it as an individual basis. I think that's very powerful, because I think in our own society, we've become something where it's everything by just, you throw it in a pool and go. And I think there's always some individual circumstances that have to be looked at. And I think that's very important. But this episode in general was just so powerful with its message, and handled it in such an educated and not hitting you over the head with it type of way. And I'm very curious to know what you guys pulled out of this episode as far as this particular thread through it. Amy, I'm going to start with you on this.
Yeah. Again, the writing on this, the words, the vocabulary that they used was so powerful. And one of the lines that stuck out to me: if a law is not just, then how can we trust those who created the law to provide justice? And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that was so powerful. And this idea that, laws do not equal justice. A line must be drawn. A line must be drawn here and no further, right? We get that. But then the line has to move as well with these ages. And as we learn, as we gain compassion, and they call it straight out like slavery, apartheid, all these things used to be legal. There was a decree in Missouri that it was okay to kill Mormons. Like, that was a law. So the fact that it was a law does not mean that it needs to still remain a law. And if we look at those who, the Constitution or anywhere in the world, like those who wrote the Constitution, they didn't have the knowledge or the compassion that we now have. And so these laws must be changed because they are not just. Like down in Florida, banning clubs. Come on, Mark, help me out.
Drag shows.
Yes, drag shows. Yeah. That's insane. Like, are you telling me that as a straight person that I can't go and open up a nightclub? That's insane. So why are we saying that for drag queens? Absolutely insane. That is not justice. Oh, and one other thing that, you're getting me going here. Oh, it's getting hot. Now I just lost it. Well, it'll come back to me.
Just let me know when it comes back to you, Amy.
Yeah.
Mark, what did you feel about that thread within this episode of the law and what's just, what's not, and how they handled that?
Yeah, I agree with him. There's a lot of great one-liners. I didn't write them down, but I connected to this line and that line as I was watching it. And what was interesting is that as the lawyer spoke, she was speaking with a pretty broad brush, right? So if you were, let's say you're a first-generation Muslim citizen that moves to the United States, right? Something about this is going to relate to you. If you are maybe a parent of somebody that has a disability or what have you, you're going to relate to another aspect. The brush was so broad that I feel like it's going to connect with a lot of people, and that's why it was so genius, because everybody coming and watching this show is going to perceive this in a different way. I know there was a lot of talk about the LGBT community, but I was seeing so many other areas where it could have been applied to as I was watching it as well. So I think that was, again, some of the genius in the writing is that maybe there were allusions to it a little bit with the LGBT community, but that's, how I was looking at it. Maybe some other people, but it was so broad that it really could have been relatable to so many different people, different walks of life. So I enjoyed that aspect. Oh, Mr. Can I say one nerdy comment?
Absolutely.
This is my nerd. I'm injecting a nerd comment into this. The set that they used was a redress of the Discovery set, whatever, blah blah blah, yada yada. It's a beautiful set, but it made no sense to me why there was a hole in the middle of the courtroom. Like, where does that hole go? What's down there? I want to know what is down there in the hole in that courtroom. Why the courtroom is not a closed courtroom. There's a giant gaping hole in the floor. I don't know. I thought that was stupid. But that was one of my few nitpicks of the episode. I love this episode.
In other words, Mark has some issues with Starfleet's interior designers. We'll get to that later. Kevin, what were your thoughts as far as how they handled this topic?
Well, I liked how Nira brought up examples of slavery and apartheid and how they were legal at one point, and how the laws throughout time have to be looked at and judged and changed. And I'm gonna pull my my Star Trek Next Generation DVD season 1 here and use it as a prop for a book. I love the fact when she's holding the law book, she's walking around with with purpose, and she goes, "Because a law is not a mirror to society." She's walking around a little bit. A law is an ideal, and the fact that she also, and it says it's a beacon to remind us how to be our better selves. And I like that she also goes over to the council and like makes them read from it directly. I'm like, boom, That's how
but
you
she has
make a
to walk
statement.
around the room.
Yeah. You got to strut. You got to do that. Looking badass too.
Walk around the donut.
Yes. What's that hole down there? What's going on down there? I noticed that too, Mark. I thought that was funny. But I like that challenging law is part of being of the process. And is it right? Is it justice? And does it need to be redone and changed and stuff like that? So just like, we need to look at ourselves and we're not the same person, we were many, many years ago. And when these laws were done at a certain time, people change and ideals change. And I thought it was done really well.
Amy, did you?
Yes, I remembered my thought. Thank you, Kevin, for reminding me. Talking about those laws and how she was, saying, Nira was saying that, a law is not justice, and Starfleet maybe unknowingly became the prosecutor, right? Those who are putting and not having equal rights. And, I thought, ooh, so our laws are persecuting those in its government. Like, that's wrong. That's wrong. That was a really good call out too.
One of the things I really liked with this too was the fact that I love the scene how she uses Una's testimony to bring up to get her off, as far as and use it, like you said, Kevin, when she drops the book and says, "Please read this." It was incredibly powerful. And again, I come back to me too. Mark, you made a great point about how it can be covered in broad strokes, but I also just come back to to me, the fact that they also say we have to adjust the line. We can't have just this broad stroke. We have to adjust the line because every instance is different. And I think that's so important, because I think we fall into a trap of putting everything in this one big broad stroke, and we got to look at the nuance of it too. And I think that's one of the things I really liked about this episode was it not only focused on the broad side of it, but it also focused on the nuance in the individual, and just and it's never as cut and dry as it seems. Amy.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Nira did with April, right? And was going at him saying, well, you broke this prime directive, general order number 1, which now we have canon is the same. And it's like, it seems that the rules of Starfleet only apply when captains deem it so. So again, going on this case by case, like that shows wisdom in my book.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was just beautifully done. Some of the better writing in Star Trek I've seen in this modern era since we've started it. But guys, I want to move on to this topic. I want to talk about Captain Pike. The man has some resolve. Obviously, in this episode, we find out why, storyline-wise, why Captain Pike wasn't a big part of episode 1. This is a captain who is basically willing to die to get the attention of somebody that can help somebody on his crew. He let his oxygen go down to 1%.
Kyle, he looks like he's buying apricots in 2020.
That could be it too. Leftover COVID masks from make great props. The other thing though that I liked about this with Pike, with his resolve, was his resolve in his own willpower, because we get that moment where you have the prosecution trying to get Pike pulled into this mess and get Pike in trouble for hiding Una's secret. And you just see Pike, and you can see his mind processing all this. And I think if it was another captain, he might have just teleported right into the middle of the proceedings. And yet Pike let things play out. And I think it's such a great moment for Pike, because we see his resolve to help his his close friend and do anything he can for her, but to also hold himself back when every instinct in him is to say, I need to be up there, I need to make the speech. And they actually address that a couple of different times within the episode with Pike as well. And I'm just curious to see what you guys thought of how they portrayed Pike here. Mark,
This is so the menagerie, because if you think about the menagerie, you have, it's another trial episode. It's TOS. And in that instance, you have Pike and the crew watching on a screen the events that had happened of, Pike and Spock or whatever from the Cage episode. And here it is again. And they have done this, and this is a brilliant little tip of the hat, where they're not in the courtroom. They're in a room on the Enterprise watching it all unfold separate. And when's the last time we saw this in Star Trek? I don't know, but it's so TOS, and that's something that struck me while you were talking. I was just like, oh my goodness, it's another sort of parallel to what they were doing with the original series.
Kevin, what about you? How did you feel about how Pike handled things in this episode?
He's a man with conviction, and when you have his trust, he will bend over backward for you. And I think this shows how much number one means to him. And I think, too, the fact that he recognizes the risk that Una took to come out about this. And, it just seems, Pike just seems like one of those guys that would be really willing to, go the distance for his crew. Because when you do that, you make the crew want to do that for you and each other. And, he just seems to have a lot of confidence in everyone there, and specifically with Una. And I think it's important, too, because, Nira says that as she was leaving, she was looking at a Starship crew that proudly serves under an Illyrian commander. And she was very skeptical about doing this. And, she says that that's a good start. And the fact that a captain goes that far for someone like that says a lot, not just to Illyrians, but everyone in general.
Amy, again, Pike was such resolve, but the other moment too was when we saw at the end of the episode when Una teleports in, and the rest of the crew leaves, and he just walks up and just hugs Una, and Una's like a little bit shocked, and then she embraces the hug. But it's just, I don't. Pike's gonna become my favorite captain here shortly if he keeps this up. I'm just saying.
He definitely shows some amazing leadership, and I'm gonna get there in a roundabout way, so bear with me. My very favorite and my very first principal told me his most important job was to hire the best teachers that he could to staff his school. And why that was so empowering to me was that he hired me and then he let me do my job. He gave me the freedom, and he gave me enough rope that if I needed to, but thankfully I didn't. But Pike and Una do the same thing here. They go out and they find the best civil defense attorney, who happens to be Nira. And you don't go to someone and say, you're the best, but then do it my way. And Nira makes it very clear to Una, we're going to do this my way. And Pike respects that. And so, yeah, he was going to be either stubborn or stupid and almost die running out of air. But he put his trust in Nira and stepped back. That is an amazing leader. And I was just blown away by that. So, yeah, I agree with you, Kyle. Pike is an amazing captain. And some would jump in. I don't know if Picard would, but yeah, Kirk might jump in, or, well, it's not going right, and I can navigate this, and I have
Michael
all the
Burnham.
answers. Yeah, Burnham for sure. Yes, I will agree to that. So we see some amazing leadership qualities here, and the fact that he, just embraces Una at the end, I felt was so fitting. He is a hands-on captain, more so than anyone else, and it just lends to his character that is beautiful, and that's what's making this a family. And that's where, I love it.
So before we teleport out of Away Mission 1 here, is there any final things that we may not have mentioned that one of you would like to bring up, or you feel like we've covered everything? Kevin?
I want to bring attention to what Amy had mentioned, and I think it was huge because a couple things. First of all, we got the clap, which I thought was great. It wasn't a slow clap. It was just everyone started clapping. And I was like, as I was watching that for the first time, I was going, someone needs a hug here. Either, Pike's got to go hug Nira, or, Una's got to go hug Nira, or, Una's got to get hugged. And we got the hug. I thought it was great. I needed the hug, and I got it.
Amy, Mark, any final thoughts before we dive into Away Mission 2? Amy?
Yeah, one thing that I thought was super important for everyone to hear was when Nira was talking to La'an, and it's like, oh, you feel that you would turn her in, and you felt that you, felt that there's something wrong with you, that you feel as Noonien Soong that there might be some genetic passed down to you. And she's like, yeah, I'm afraid that I could turn bad. And Nira's whole thing of, it's not you. There's going to be good people, bad people in every type of group. And we were taught to put down Illyrians. We were taught, and we can put down immigrants, African American, people of color, LGBT, right? All of these things, they're bad, they're bad, they're bad. And so that's why we drew the line. These augments are bad, and they're turning bad, and they're being evil, and da-da-da. No, in any group, there are good people and there are bad people. There are in church that's proclaimed to be the good. There's good people and there's bad people. So for that conversation to be had between Nira and Illyrian and La'an, who's a Noonien Soong, was so powerful. I just love that it's like we were taught to make us feel bad, and then that's why we doubt ourselves. That needs to not be taught anymore. Fear is taught, and I love that point.
Mark, any final thoughts on before we get into Away Mission 2?
I'll bring up Robert April real quick because I think they've done a lot of work with season 1, and the beginning here of season 2 to really paint Robert April, the first captain of that particular enterprise, as a really stand-up good captain and really likable. The actor, I think you mentioned earlier, does a great job. You believe him that he was a former captain of the Enterprise. And I think that it was a bold choice to sort of paint him with a little bit of rust on him, a little bit of dirt, so he's not so squeaky clean. And that they don't always do in Star Trek. You, especially like with Picard, he was just perfection all of the time through TNG, and this does show, especially with the conflict now with Una and him. When he said flat out that if he knew she was an Illyrian, he never would have, sponsored her, and he meant it. That is something that I hope they revisit. And there's a little bit of conflict there because he had been such an advocate for her. And I'd like to see where that goes. And I think that was an interesting direction to go with his character, because up until this point, he was just another one of those real good captains.
I think that's a great point. I think that wraps up all of our discussions for Away Mission 1. Let's transport into Away Mission 2. And of course, Away Mission 2 means it's time for some Star Trek trivia and Easter eggs. And we've got some fun ones for this episode. So let's see what is coming in through those subspace signals on trivia. Una mentions that Ad Astra per Aspera was the motto of Starfleet before the founding of the Federation. The insignia for Starfleet Command on both arm patches and flags on Starship Enterprise consisted of a yellow arrowhead on a blue round star background, which was framed by a thick gray inner border and a thin red outer border. Inside the gray border there were more white stars and the Latin words ad astra per aspera. That also means through hardships to the stars. It is also the state motto for Kansas.
What?
You should have known that, Kyle.
No, that was wrong Kansas there, Kevin. Come on now. Yeah, I found that interesting when I was doing my research.
Interesting.
Yes. A couple other fun pieces of trivia. Just before her trial begins, Una is warned that not taking a plea deal would result in a minimum sentence of at least 2 years in a Starfleet penal colony. This was established in the DS9 episode Dr. Bashir, I presume, where Julian Bashir's father received the sentence when he took full responsibility for Julian's genetically engineered background and his subsequent joining of Starfleet as a doctor. Also, I found this very interesting. Leon states in her testimony that she's been promoted each year of service to Starfleet. As she holds only the rank of lieutenant, that would mean she has only been in Starfleet for 2 years. Enough time to go from ensign to a lieutenant, junior grade, to a full lieutenant. So a little bit of Star Trek timeline things there. But guys, too, we got some Easter eggs. And I know Mark brought this up a little bit ago. Those uniforms are sharp. Everything about Star Trek has become iconic, including its uniforms. Fans and non-fans alike recognize the gold, blue, and red hues of the classic Starfleet tunics, but only those who watch the show may recognize the crew's dress uniforms. Worn for more formal occasions, they made their debut in the 1967 installment Court Martial, which incidentally is also the first episode to use the term Starfleet, in which Captain Kirk is put on trial for the death of a fellow officer. In Ad Astra Per Aspera, we get a major callback to those original dress uniforms. Updated for Strange New Worlds, the dress uniforms that the crew dons for Una's hearing feature many elements pulled from the 1967 episode. This includes elaborate gold trim around the neck that stretches down the center while also incorporating the shoulder stripes that originated from the dress uniforms on Star Trek Discovery, creating a blend of the two aesthetics. But the most direct nod to Court Martial might be the colorful badges the officers wear, directly inspired by similar patches worn by William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and the other officers in Court Martial. The likes of Dr. Mbega, Leon Noonan Singh, and Admiral April are all adorned with these same badges, which are made up of differently colored triangles in various configurations. Even Mr. Spock's badge is cleverly designed to be similar, but not the same as the one worn by Nimoy, suggesting that he earned more accolades in the years between the series. Mark, I'm going to you because you brought this point up earlier. These uniforms were sharp.
Oh, my Lord. Yeah, I loved it. I never understood why, like, Discovery had really cute uniforms, the blue ones with the gold. I did like that a lot. I never got the sideways sort of weird collar thing that they did. I never got the weird, like, length that they were doing with the jackets and stuff.
Asymmetrical.
The asymmetrical, it didn't make any sense to me. Especially where it was only 10 years before TOS. So this is definitely a course correction as far as that's concerned, and in a beautiful way. I couldn't love them anymore. If I had the money to buy them for STLV, I would totally rock one. So if there's a wealthy sugar daddy patron out there that wants to send me one, I won't be mad.
You would rock it, Mark.
Yeah.
Kevin, I know you're a fan of the Star Trek uniforms. What did you think of these dress?
Yeah, they're really cool, and I guess the ranks or insignias that were, these bright enamel-y looking things. Sometimes a little distracting, but very cool. I love the way they were tailored, and I love the kind of silver and gold stripes that were going down the front, and then the lapels and stuff like that. Really, really cool. I was really impressed with the wardrobe in this episode. Really well
Is
done.
Fansets making those pins? Is somebody from Fansets listening? Please make those pins. You have a month or two. I will buy them. Also, trivia, the thing that Umbenga's hand is on, it's sort of like a lie detector test. That is, again, a callback to the original series. Spock had his hand on one. I believe if it wasn't Court Martial, it would have been for the Menagerie.
Good point. I got one other fun piece of Easter eggs that was in this episode. I didn't know this, so this was kind of surprising to me. When the advocate general convenes the hearing against Una-Chin Riley, she introduces two fellow high-ranking officers. To her right is a Vulcan Starfleet commander, and to her left is a Tellarite who she describes as a representative of Space Command. This is the first reference to that organization since the original series, and the first time it's been firmly established as an entity separate from Starfleet. Though we get no additional information as to what Space Command actually is, whether it's more of a local service akin to the National Guard or a strictly military force in contrast to Starfleet's more exploratory efforts, it's an interesting new element that adds context to a 60-year-old detail. Mark, you talked about how they've been digging in the well for these things from TOS. Maybe you have some knowledge that can enlighten us a little more.
Maybe that round circle in the middle there is a well. Maybe that's what it is. No, I didn't notice the Space Command reference, but I did notice the Tellarite makeup is back to being very similar to how it is supposed to look, which is similar to TOS and also Enterprise, because Enterprise pretty much did the TOS makeup, just updated with better prosthetics. It was Discovery that went full-on warthog left field with it, which to me never made sense. So again, it's a course correction away from what Discovery was doing, and I'm all for that. Listen, I watched Discovery. I like Discovery. I enjoy it, but it's very different from Star Trek, and they just went so far outside of canon for so much stuff. I got a bag on it. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, so since you brought it up, one last quick Easter egg, real quick. Strange New Worlds has taken steps to closely align with more of the aesthetic of the 1960s series. One of these was in this episode. Ad Astra goes one step further with a prop that calls back to an iconic original element, the chunky data disk used in the classic Star Trek series, which we see here. Guys, it's just nice to go back to old tech, which is still new tech, technically. This is kind of like revisiting the floppy disks, I feel, Kevin.
Yes. Yeah. I don't get all of the TOS call-outs. I do some, but I want to echo everything that Mark just said about Discovery. But I think that, and also too, was that the only one that thought of Ad Astra, that one Brad Pitt movie that no one saw? Just saying.
Well, again, nobody saw it, so
there you go. Yeah.
I bet there's a lot of people in Kansas that were thinking of it.
That could very well be. But guys, let's transport out because it's time to talk a little bit about the Ready Room. So in this week's episode of the Ready Room, Will Wheaton had a great discussion with Una-Chin Riley herself, the great Rebecca Romaine, and a few other things, including a rundown of the trials of Trek. But Miss Nelson, you really pointed out something in one of the chats, whether it was the BQN chat or where they left out an episode or two. So I just, Kevin, can't hear you. Okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So I'm just going to do a quick rundown of the trial episodes I found for Star Trek. Star Trek Next Generation, The Measure of a Man. Star Trek Enterprise, Judgment. Star Trek the Original Series, The Menagerie, both parts 1 and 2. You mentioned this one in the chat, Amy. Star Trek The Next Generation, The Drumhead. Star Trek Voyager, Distant Origin. Star Trek The Next Generation, The First Duty. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Tribunal. Star Trek Voyager, Death Wish. Star Trek The Next Generation, Sins of the Father. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Rules of Engagement. Star Trek The Next Generation, Devil's Due. Star Trek the Original Series, Court Martial. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Dax. And Kevin, you brought this up right before we went on air. The first episode of Star Trek Next Generation, The Encounter at Farpoint, where Q puts humanity on trial. So Star Trek has definitely had its share of courtroom legal battles. Star Trek Law, anybody? But it was an absolutely two wonderful interview with Rebecca Romaine in this episode of the Ready Room. Guys, I don't know. Did everybody get a chance to watch the Ready Room this week?
I did.
I did.
Mark?
See.
So, Amy, I'll start with you. What are some of the things that you pulled out of this week's Ready Room?
Oh dear. Come back to me.
Okay. Mr. Reitzel.
I like that Rebecca Romaine talked about how she, and I'm paraphrasing here, how she related to her character of Mystique in X-Men being persecuted and wanting to, be proud of who she was, and how the mutants in that series, get persecuted on and looked at in a certain way. And I love how she's drawn to that and she pulled from that as well. I thought that was really, really cool. And when it comes to, her family and her husband's families, being immigrants. And so it was just really neat to see the stuff that she pulled from, and that she had to like tell fans, no, I'm going to be back. I'm not done from season 1, but she just couldn't say how much that she was going to be back. And I thought that was kind of cool. And I'd like to just, when you guys get to it, I'd like to touch on some of the other Star Trek court episodes. But that was my first reaction to having her on as a guest. Ready Room.
Mark, what about you? Anything did you pull out of the Ready Room this week?
Rebecca seemed very excited to be there and talk about her character. I think this episode must have been really special for her, so I get that impression. I love that she brought up Mystique without even saying her name. She talked all around X-Men without actually saying the franchise, and that little, limbo that she was doing was quite entertaining. I also I watched the Ready Room for the trivia as well as the next week's episode previews. I love that. Those are my favorite parts of the episode, and so I had fun playing along. And then also we can, I'm sure, talk about it later towards the end. But are we going to bring up at some point the next week clip, or do you guys not talk about that?
No,
because I have thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll get to that. Amy, you can't run from it.
Okay. So you started going off about Mystique, and I'm like, when did she talk about Mystique? So that went, whoo. Listeners, if you're not watching the YouTube, I did the hand over my head. That went right over.
Did you see the X-Men movie though?
Yes,
okay.
Yes,
so, yeah.
I know Mystique. I know she played. Yeah, no,
because you brought it up earlier, so it's like I thought you would have caught that. But like Mark said, she didn't say the name.
Yeah, so I didn't know. Yeah, obviously that went right over my head. And yes, Kevin, you brought up that she talked about her immigrant status with her, grandparents and parents. Like, that was really impactful, and you could tell she made that connection with the character. Yeah. And the trivia. It was poor this time. They asked the question, then they did, here's the augments, and then the answer to the trivia was in that segment, and then they came back, it's Eric's, whatever.
Yeah, they spoiled it before we even got to it. So,
yeah,
I give you that one. I thought it was a phenomenal interview with Rebecca. And what's great about when Will especially interviews Rebecca, because they're friends outside of it because of his obvious longtime friendship with Jerry O'Connell. And I love that Will had to say, give your husband a hug and a kiss for me when you see at the end of the episode. But you could tell she felt really at ease. So I think it helped her open up even more. And I think that, this episode was very much a very personal and close to the heart episode, because I learned some things that I didn't realize that she was only a first generation American citizen. And I liked how she said, I'm a first generation actress too, by the way. So, but I thought it really opened up things. And I actually, a lot of the little things they did in the Ready Room this week were good, but I want to get back to, because I just listed off the episodes of court trials. And I want to ask you guys, what are some of your favorite court trial episodes of Star Trek? Kevin, I'm going to go to you because I know you have some thoughts on this.
I know a lot of people's one of their favorites is A Measure of Man, with Data being challenged to being a sentient being. But a couple of my favorites are, I love Sins of a Father, because I love how Picard goes to bat for Worf, and he really understands the Klingons and understands Worf, and I thought he was really good in that. And the one where what is it? Is it Rules of Engagement? The one where First Duty. That was the one that really kind of like wowed me, because you expect Data to get some type of persecution because of what he is, but you didn't expect Wesley to be part of a group that is lying to people about how someone died. And I thought that was a really well done episode. But my favorite one, though, I gotta say, though, I just never get tired of watching it, because there's some humor to it as well, and Picard just cooks in this, and that's Devil's Due. The planet that made the deal with the devil. I just thought that was great. I love how he was able to turn the tables too.
I agree with you about the Devil's Due, especially that was one of the more fun episodes of Next Generation. Amy.
Okay. I just thought of an episode. Maybe it will fit in Justice, because Wesley's on trial.
Yeah, to die because he broke some plants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
right.
my favorites out of this, like Drumhead, like that's one of my favorite, and it has similarities.
That's a classic witch trial right there.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's similarities, because that officer who was first called, he lied on his application to Starfleet because he had Romulan grandparents. So there's a small connection there with Drumhead. And another one on your list that I really like is that Deep Space Nine Dax, where Jadzia is accused of murdering her previous host, Curzon. That's a really good one. And Kevin, you and I, we love TNG, because you were listing the episodes and I'm like, yep, that one. Yep, that one. So I agree with everything Kevin has said about Measure of Man, and
you just love it when Picard takes it to Ardra. You're like, yeah.
And the First Duty. I was going to talk about First Duty, but Kevin talked about that. So everything Kevin says plus Dax. Yes, thank you.
Mark, what about you? Any of these trial episodes stand out more than the others?
The one standout I brought up earlier, which was the Discovery episode that I thought was a really bad courtroom episode. It stood out for me because I just felt like it wasn't very good of a courtroom episode. But the rest that you guys have been mentioning are all really solid. I don't typically gravitate towards the courtroom episodes. Amy knows my affinity for the weird Joe Menosky episodes. So, I don't necessarily go back to these often. But again, I love them and their ability to inspire and get people to think. And I also love that in my Star Trek.
Well, before we close out this episode, let's take a look at the Orb of Prophecy and look at the clip we got from next week's episode tomorrow, because we got some time travel going on. Mark, you had something you wanted to put into this right away.
I am glad it doesn't break canon because it's time travel. And I love that it tied in Enterprise. And they had the same LCARs. The guy was holding the display. It was the same LCARs display as the time soldiers from Enterprise. It was perfect. And they got Kirk on the bridge, if you didn't see. But and he's going to be interacting with La'an, and they're going to go to the past and whatever, have this adventure. But it doesn't mean that Kirk will meet Pike in prime timeline before he's supposed to meet him, or have this prior, bromance beforehand. So he's there again, but it's a timey-wimey thing, so it doesn't count. So
Mark, can you remind us? Can you remind us of the LCARs regarding the time soldier reference you made to from Enterprise? It's been a while since I've watched it.
Oh, absolutely. So they had the temporal investigations,
Right.
the Daniels and whatever. Well, at some point they go onto the main ship. And I think Archer's getting the tour, and the guy points out to the Enterprise J. Anyway, and other things. But you can see, and somebody posted it online too, and I love that. That there is like an Elcar's terminal in the background in one of those scenes that has the exact schematics that they used when they made this recreation, and it essentially shows a timeline, right, and where it splits and where it comes back, and that is within the Alcars, but it's shot for shot, it's the same display. They just made a holographic representation as opposed to being a physical representation, but it's the same display, and I love that.
Amy, Kevin, any thoughts on what we saw for the preview for next week's episode?
Well, I feel like,
no, go ahead, Amy.
Okay. I just feel like, okay, we've got our court trial episode, check. We have our time travel episode, check. I'm like, all right, what other kind of episode can we get in there? And I want to see it happen. And
they're going to turn into lizard people.
Ooh, right? Yeah, Genesis or lizard people. Oh, yeah. We do need, and they're going to like, cross over with Lower Decks. Like, the beauty of episodic TV is here with us in full force, and I'm loving it.
Episodes!
Kevin.
Yeah, I was intrigued. I'm always intrigued. You're going to catch my attention with Star Trek and time travel. And so I was curious, but I feel like lately, though, especially with season 2 of Picard, it didn't really hit the mark for me. I was kind of let down with the time travel and that and how it was used. But there's been a lot of fun time travel that has been used well, in my opinion, for Star Trek, and I'm curious how that's going to use. And obviously, we got Captain Kirk with this, but I'm also wondering, Leon, when he's there bleeding out, I'm like, why aren't you doing something to help him out here? You're just going to let him die. I'm like, what's going on here? But I'm kind of curious to see where this character came from, if we're going to get that in there or not. But
I think that Gorn's in this one too.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm excited for it.
I'm curious to see what they're going to do. I'm curious to see Kirk back on this show too, and I know that the actor who plays Kirk will be a guest for the Ready Room next week too. So I'm very interested to see if we get any insights on that. But
they should have just called him something else. He's horrible. Anyway, sorry to end on a downer, but he's the worst Kirk there's ever been. Anyway, oh well.
Well, on that note, it's time to close things out. First of all, thank you to this amazing crew for once again joining me to talk all things Strange New Worlds. I really appreciate it, guys. And you can find, of course, the Union Federation in many places. If you're watching this video, that means you're watching it on the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel. Please give us a like, give us a subscribe, share it out. We're trying to as we continue to try to build our YouTube channel and presence. 2, if you're listening to us on the podcast, you can either be listening to us on the Fandom Podcast Network or on the BQN network, which you can find on any of your popular podcast catchers, including Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, so many things out there. You can find us directly. You can email us at theunionfederation@gmail.com, or you can also visit the Union Federation Facebook group, and where we keep you updated on all the happenings in Trek. Kevin, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Spartan_Phoenix. And of course, you can find me in the Union Federation and BQN Facebook groups.
You can also find me, Kyle, on Twitter at AKyleW or on Instagram at AKyleFandom. Amy, where can people find you and the BQN?
Well, just search BQN and you'll see all of our shows there. I do co-host Union Federation. Oh, yeah, that's this one. Okay, sorry. Let's get the right one. I host a couple. Galaxy Class, which is about Next Generation. And I also co-host All Good Things with Mark, which covers all of Star Trek. I am on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, but I am also on Facebook, which is the better place to find me, the Union Facebook group and the BQN Facebook group called BQN Collective.
Mark, where can people find you on social media? Plus, I also know you got a little project that's a little bit outside the Star Trek realm right now.
Yeah. So when I'm not egging Paul Wesley's house, which I plan on doing this weekend, you can find me in the BQN Collective Facebook page. You can also find me on Twitter at MarkWhite207. Amy had mentioned I'm on All Good Things with her on the BQN network. And I recently launched a new show called Cinema Z. And I have Matt Jennings and Laz Marquez on. And those guys really make the show. They are so hilarious. And Cinema Z is special because we go and look at films that we feel have some importance and merit as art, more so than maybe movies that you would have seen, big Hollywood blockbusters, right? So we're covering independent films, foreign films, lesser known films, but stuff that we find important, or at least important to us in our lives. And we talk about ourselves, and we have some cocktails and a lot of laughs. So I think Amy had pointed out online that she recommends that you just listen, even if you haven't seen the film. And I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Well, definitely check that out because it sounds like it is a very fun project Mark has going on there. But as far as the Union Federation, again, thank you to all our wonderful listeners, both watching on YouTube and listening via podcast. Until next time, hailing frequencies are now closed.